Good evening. Welcome to VATV. Today is May 7, 2014, and my name is Mary Truong. Welcome to our today's show. As you know, VATV is the voice of Vietnamese American from the greater Boston area, and it is sponsored by Vietnamese American Initiative for Development, known as VATAID. You can follow our program live on every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. on the BNN TV network via cable Comcast Channel 9 and RCN Channel 15, and also online at www.bnntv.org. This evening will be repeated on the following schedule: Sunday at 5 p.m., Monday at 1 p.m., and Tuesday at 11 a.m. For today's program, we have the pleasure and honor to invite Dr. Luise Druke, visiting scholar, Harvard Fellow, to talk about her book titled Innovation in Refugee Protection. This is a live show, so please call in at 617-708-3290. So welcome, Dr. Druke. Did I say it right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for joining on our show.
It's a distinct honor and pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. So we don't have a lot of time, and the book is so exciting, and I'm sure our audience can't wait to hear about it. So could you quickly talk about your book?
Yes. Yeah. I'm very pleased to say that in slide number 1 we have the overview, and it is a book which is looking at the evolution of the work in the last 60 years of the international refugee protection regime after World War II, yeah, in order to better understand why people flee, what legal status they need, and the solutions which should be found. And the title, Innovations in Refugee Protection, and a compendium on 60 years of the UNHCR, comes because I'm looking at the High Commissioners, who are our chief executive officers of the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, yeah, in order to who have solved refugee problems since the inception of the office in 1950.
I see.
Kính thưa quý vị, hôm nay trong phòng thu hình chương trình của chúng tôi được tiếp đón tiến sĩ Luise Druke. Bà là đứng đầu cơ quan cao quỹ tị nạn Liên Hợp Quốc trong suốt 30 năm. Hôm nay bà đến chương trình VATV để giới thiệu cuốn sách của bà về chính sách đối với người tị nạn trên toàn thế giới qua kinh nghiệm của bà trong lúc phục vụ tại cơ quan Liên Hợp Quốc. Đây là một cuốn sách nói về người tị nạn trên khắp thế giới, chứ không phải riêng một phần nào.
Before we can continue talking about the overview of the book, if I may let the audience know your biography a little bit so that they know who you are. So Dr. Luise Druke is a fellow at Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and visiting scholar at Harvard Law School. She serves as co-chair for UN Studies at Suffolk University, the government department, and is a part-time lecturer at Leibniz University, the political science department. Having headed the UNHCR international missions for nearly 30 years, she has authored and co-edited many other refugee, United Nations and European Union related publications. In the 80s, she single-handedly saved more than 60,000 Vietnamese refugees from dying in the open sea. That's very impressive.
I helped to design a program in Southeast Asia and Singapore, which was called the DESERO, yeah, Disembarkation Resettlement Offer, and that contributed to save 67,000 Vietnamese boat people. So I didn't do it by myself, but the ideas to have such a program and have states help us to get us visas, that was done in Singapore.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. Thưa quý vị, như quý vị đã biết, tiến sĩ Luise Druke là một nhà nghiên cứu ở tại trường Đại học Harvard, là học giả của trường luật này. Bà là đồng chủ tịch nghiên cứu về Liên Hiệp Quốc tại Đại học Suffolk, bang chính quyền, và là giảng viên tại Đại học Leibniz, phân khoa khoa học chính trị. Bà đứng đầu cơ quan cao ủy tị nạn Liên Hiệp Quốc trong gần 30 năm. Bà là tác giả và cộng tác nhiều ấn phẩm liên quan đến người tị nạn của Tổ chức Liên Hiệp Quốc và Liên hiệp Âu Châu. Trong những năm 80, chính bà là người trực tiếp nhúng tay vào việc cứu vớt hơn 60.000 người tị nạn Việt Nam đang nguy khốn trên biển. Và khi nhắc đến tin tức này, bà cũng cho biết thêm lúc đó là bà đang ở Singapore và bà đã không phải một mình bà làm, nhưng mà bà là người đứng đầu khởi xướng. Như vậy công của bà rất lớn ở trong việc cứu vớt này.
Yeah. So let's talk about the overview of the book now.
As we say in the slide number 3,
Yes.
it is on the organizations of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, but I focus in these case studies, if we could just lead them here, on 4 operations for which I have been responsible, and they are closed. And the first is an early warning operation which we did in the 80s, and that has then led further to cooperation with IT communities in refugee protection. The big case study for teaching and training is on the Vietnamese boat people, specifically in Singapore. And the third case study is on Chile, where I have spent 40 years since the coup d'etat in 73, but then as a representative in the mid-80s, in the time of Pinochet, to help negotiate for people who wanted to return from exile and thereby reduce the exile. And then the last is to help about 40,000 Namibian refugees and exiles from all over the world to come back through Angola, where I was the coordinator, to go to Namibia in time for the elections to set up their own state. And this is analyzed in detail for teaching and training.
I see. Thank you.
Bà cho biết rằng là trong những cái nét mà sinh hoạt đặc biệt của nổi bật của bà về ở từ deal với lại việc người tị nạn ở tại chính quyền Singapore, cũng như là ở đất nước Chile ở Nam Mỹ, không phải là tị nạn mà bà cũng còn thương thuyết những cái người mà bị đày ra khỏi, bị tống khứ ra khỏi chính quyền của nước đó, cũng như mới đây là những cái người mà ở xứ sở Phi Châu Namibia nữa.
Number 3.
Yes, and so why did you go into humanitarian work?
The important thing for me was the legacy of World War II, of Nazi Germany, having contributed to the killing of millions of people, and the consciousness as the political science students that easily one can redraw laws to burn synagogues and people.
Yeah.
And my mother was the president of the Red Cross near Hanover, and so I grew up in the humanitarian spirit, and so it was a natural engagement very early on that I wanted to not just help but also write laws and politics at highest level to make sure that to the extent possible prevention is possible before people have to be seen their rights violated and become human rights victims and that refugees.
Trả lời cái câu hỏi là tại sao bà lại dấn thân vào công việc mà về có tính cách nhân đạo này trong cuộc đời của bà, thì bà nói rằng là bà là người Đức sống ở bên Đức, và sau chiến tranh thế chiến thứ hai thì bà đã thấy quá nhiều cái việc cái người chết chóc ở trong chiến tranh. Vả lại đặc biệt thì cũng mẹ của bà là đã từng là chủ tịch của Hội Hồng Thập Tự Đỏ, cho nên Hội Hồng Thập Tự, cho nên những cái việc làm về nhân đạo không có gì là xa lạ đối với bà, thành ra bà thích và dấn thân theo đuổi việc nhân đạo trong cuộc đời của bà.
Yeah, cảm ơn anh. So, refugees, what is it? What is the definition of refugees according to the United Nations?
Let me give you the formal definition, and that is a person fearing well-founded fear of persecution outside of his or her country of residence and nationality for reasons of political opinion, religion, social grievance or nationality, and is unwilling or unable to return to that country. That is the classical definition.
I see, yeah. Okay.
And we have it on slide number 5.
Right.
So we repeat, for reasons of race, religion, nationality, belonging to a social group, and that is now many women, of a political opinion outside of the country. That is the classical definition, and we talk a little bit further in a minute.
Yes.
Trả lời cái câu hỏi là định nghĩa thế nào là người tị nạn. Người tị nạn là một cái người mà bị kỳ thị vì lý do chủng tộc, lý do tôn giáo, lý do chính trị, lý do nguồn gốc hay là lý do về xã hội đối với lại cái quốc tịch, cái quốc gia mà cái người đó đang sinh sống.
And now we have a slide of number 6 on the state parties of the 1951 convention, which this book is covering, which provides this classical definition coming out of the post-Cold War time. And that is 147 member states of the 193 member states of the United Nations in the international community have ratified.
I see.
And once a state ratifies a convention, then together between that state, the UNHCR and non-governmental organizations, we cooperate to draw up the laws and the procedures, and then do individual determination of refugee status as it is done in the United States.
I see. So could you talk about the trends and where the refugees are in the world?
Yes, we have on page 7 the trends of the refugees, and there we see that after 1960, when we had the big decolonization of African countries, we had a big increase until the 90s. And since the Yugoslav war, until now, we have an increase in internally displaced persons who are feeling persecuted for the same reasons as people outside of the countries are, but they have not been able or have not been willing to leave their country and are within their own countries. And that is the case of Syria today, where you have 10 million affected Syrians, and half of them are within Syria, but in, as we call it, refugee-like situations.
Yes.
And we have a slide on the evolution of the refugees in number 8.
Hỏi về cái chính sách tị nạn, thì sau khi mà Liên Hiệp Quốc thông qua cái chính sách tị nạn và được các nước chấp nhận cái chính sách đó, thì trên khắp thế giới bà đã đi đến các nơi và đã hoạt động từ các nước ở Trung Âu, ví dụ như Yugoslavia, hay là ở các nước Phi Châu, và trở về như hiện tại chính sách ở Syria, những cái người mà bị ngược đãi, bạc đãi, bị thanh toán ở chính trong cái lãnh thổ quốc gia của mình.
And what is important to just to put the perspectives on what are we talking about, as of the latest official statistics from UNHCR later last year, it was about 40 million people.
Wow.
That is refugees in the classical sense determined as such, and then internally displaced persons in need of international protection and of concern to the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. And that's the states who help us to determine this. We are not automatically, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, responsible for all internally displaced persons, because they are usually supposed to be able to be protected by their national governments.
Right.
But if that is not the case, and the Secretary General asked the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, then UNHCR can take responsibility, and that comes then to the total number. The more recent is nearly 40 million, 38 million
Right,
people.
that's a lot. Yeah.
Dạ, bà có cho biết rằng là cái số người mà bị kỳ
Slide
thị,
9.
dạ, bây giờ đó là gần 40 triệu người, mà thường những cái trường hợp này lại ở trong một nội bộ của một nước, cho nên rằng là thuộc chính quyền của một nước. Như vậy là Liên Hợp Quốc rất khó là can thiệp. Nhưng nếu như mà có đòi hỏi mạnh thì ông Tổng thư ký Liên Hợp Quốc có yêu cầu cái người cao ủy tị nạn đó can thiệp vào.
And so to sum up, the book has found that the refugee protection is deteriorating all over the world, both in the Northern Hemisphere, where in Europe or in Northern America we are dealing with refugee status determination in order to allow people to get a legal status. Or if they're not recognized, then they would have to be channeled into immigration procedure. And in the Southern Hemisphere, Africa, Latin America, but basically we see now in South Asia, Middle East, North Africa, where, and that is our picture number, and slide number 6, we see where we have many refugees and displaced persons. Many of those states have not yet ratified the Geneva Convention, and that's where sometimes the work for protection is very difficult, and that's contributing to ever increasing challenges to protect people.
Right.
So we may write books and we say people need to be protected, but we are dependent on states. Protection of refugees is the responsibility of states.
I see.
And even if they are not members of the UN Convention relating to the status of refugees, they are still bound by being a member state of the United Nations and having adopted the statute of the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, which is a General Assembly resolution 428, which basically spells out that UNHCR is to protect refugees and find solutions to their problems. And that is a very broad mandate. And sometimes the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and colleagues in the field are having a difficult time to get rights and protection into reality.
I see.
Cái chiều hướng mà bảo vệ cái người tị nạn bây giờ đó trên khắp thế giới nó có phần suy thoái. Nói chung kể từ Phi Châu qua châu Mỹ Latin cũng như về Đông Nam Á, cũng như đến những nước ở miền Bắc châu Phi. Cái điều khó khăn là người tị nạn thì thường là của nước nào là thuộc chính quyền của nước đó, mà tùy là chính quyền đó có theo cái công ước ở Geneva hay không, cũng như là chính quyền đó nếu là một thành viên của cơ quan Liên Hợp Quốc thì còn bị ràng buộc vào những luật lệ hay là những ấn định của Liên Hợp Quốc nữa.
But the book is also a message of hope in a way that there have been problems and we have found solutions. And it is demonstrated here.
Right.
And I would like to pay tribute to Vietnamese,
Thank you.
how they have contributed to finding solutions themselves in building new lives in many countries, but especially in America. Because as statistics in this book show, there were about 2 million in total
Right.
who escaped by boat and via land.
Yes.
We don't know how many have drowned. But what I would like to show to students whom I teach and other professors teach today is solutions are there to be solved. And when you accept to work in this field, you will contribute finding solutions.
Trong cái phần kết luận của cái cuốn sách này thì bà có nói tuy là cái chiều hướng bi quan như vậy nhưng mà có rất nhiều hy vọng để giải quyết trong tương lai. Đặc biệt bà khen ngợi những người Việt Nam tị nạn, ước chừng là hơn 2 triệu rải rác khắp thế giới, nhưng cái sự thành công của họ, của những người Việt Nam này trên bước đường định cư, trên bước đường phát triển tại đất nước mà họ cư ngụ đã là một cái phần thưởng và một cái niềm vui cho công việc của bà.
I'm very proud what Vietnamese have been able to accomplish. And I went specially also to interview some who have been working with me in Singapore, to interview them in Los Angeles.
I see.
And their stories are here as well as in Germany. And that provides, as we call it in academia, testimonial literature, to show to the students that refugees are human beings.
Yes.
They have agency, they have abilities, they bring a lot of contributions individually or as a group.
Yes.
And we need to be mindful of respecting it and making it a part of the solution and to minimize the suffering.
Trên bước đường mà bà viết cuốn sách này, bà cũng gặp trở lại, phỏng vấn và nói chuyện với nhiều cái người Việt Nam đã tị nạn từ Singapore cho tới Los Angeles và qua Âu Châu. Thì bà rất cảm phục và bà thấy rằng là người tị nạn cũng là những người có những cái tâm huyết và đi đến những cái đất nước mới thì có những sự thành công rất là đáng khen ngợi.
So let's talk about the time where you were in your 20s and getting involved with saving the Vietnamese refugees. What was the situation like back then? We're talking about in 1975.
Well, 75, that is when the evacuation from the American ambassador roof was and the barges out of the Mekong Delta.
Yes.
I wasn't there at that time, but we very closely watched it from many countries, and I was at that time still first in Germany, then in France, and very closely following after having started working with refugees, first from Southern Africa, then from Chile, with Amnesty, with my city in Hanover. And I was very early on, when I applied to work with the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees in 77, I applied to go to Hanoi or to Laos.
I see.
I wanted to go to the most difficult posts. At that time, no women were sent to those places.
Right.
But so I started in Geneva and started right away with family reunification because many people had been evacuated and hadn't been able to take all of their families out.
Right.
Or some had already fled. And so some of them wrote to us, sometimes in Vietnamese. So we had people, colleagues working with us to try to get the sense of those letters. And I was in charge from 77 on. Until then, I was asked to come out to Malaysia first and was then in charge of southern Malaysia and to Pulau Tenggah and in Singapore. And then many ships arrived, Dutch ships, Danish ships, German ships, American ships, French, and others. And we opened a formal office, and then I was asked to head this office, which I did for 3 years. And after the 3 years, again, my director who had asked me to come to Kuala Lumpur asked me to come to Geneva to head up some of the countries, Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia, from the Geneva end. So all in all, I worked 6 years with Vietnamese boat people.
That's amazing. Thank you so
Trở
much.
lại là trả lời cái câu hỏi là tại sao là bà bắt đầu cái công việc của bà ở Cao quỹ tị nạn Liên Hợp Quốc, thì bà nói rằng là sau cái năm 75 đó bà nhìn những cái người tị nạn, đặc biệt là ở Đông Dương, thì bà thấy rất là xúc động, cho nên đến năm 1977 là bà xin việc, xin gia nhập vào Cao quỹ tị nạn Liên Hợp Quốc và yêu cầu được gửi đi Hà Nội hay là Lào. Nhưng mà lúc đó thì thật sự ra không có người nữ nhân viên nào mà được gửi đi như vậy hết, cho nên bà phải ở lại Geneva. Sau đó bà làm việc ở Malaysia, Singapore, rồi trở về Geneva, và đặc biệt là làm việc rất lâu đối với người Việt Nam.
And you asked what the atmosphere were then.
Yeah.
One has to say that the sympathy and the openness of response towards the Vietnamese, as it was before towards Chileans, though from different political perspectives, was as positive as it will never be ever for any refugee group. At that time in Germany, we had Christian Democrat governments in most of the states. And there were open appeals to make big efforts also for rescue at sea. And that's how I got involved with helping the committee Kappa Namur with Robert Neudeck and Heinrich Böll and the philosopher Guzman from France to charter a ship, which then was called Kappa Namur, which from 79 to 86, with 5 different ships, rescued about 14,000 Vietnamese boat people. And the list, it's the first time published ever in this book, which I was given by the Kappa Namur.
I see.
And that is a big contribution, even though it was not the only one. There were other ships, the Friendship and Acuna and World Vision. And perhaps in some cases one might admit that it has motivated people to leave, but in humanitarian affairs we have learned we have to be inclusive and safe.
Yes.
And that has worked, and this effort was unique. And unfortunately people fleeing, as matters stand in world politics now, is not available to people in need of protection as we speak.
I see.
Trả lời rằng tại sao cái người tị nạn lại đi trốn chạy như vậy, thì bà có đưa ra cái hình ảnh ở đất nước Chile cũng như ở đất nước Việt Nam. Tuy là không so sánh hai chế độ chính trị, nhưng mà những cái người ra đi đều có mục đích như nhau. Bà có nhắc trở lại là cái lúc đó là ở nước Đức có một chính phủ ủng hộ, và có một cái nhóm người đã đứng ra lập cái tàu Cap Amur để đi vớt người tị nạn. Thì không phải là chỉ là một cái tàu, nhưng mà có nhiều tàu gọi là đóng góp vào trong đó. Và kết quả là từ năm 1979 cho năm 1986 đã cứu vớt được trên 14.000 người tị nạn, và đặc biệt đó là người Việt Nam. Thì bà cũng thấy rằng là từ cái Cap Amur đó trở về sau cho tới bây giờ thì người ta vẫn tiếp tục ra đi, nhưng cái ảnh hưởng, cái tinh thần của Cap Amur vẫn còn đó.
So now, so Luise, some people might not know the reason why the Vietnamese flee Vietnam, by boat, and so the thinking is, oh, Vietnam was supposed to be at peace after a long war. So why did they leave? Could you tell some people who don't know the situation as to why?
I have about 10 reasons analyzed in the book.
Yes.
after 30 years of war,
Yeah.
having been sent to re-education camps,
Right.
having governmental officials on top of you who are politically in charge but perhaps functionally not as knowledgeable as you were when you were running a particular function in government or business. And there were a number of people very badly treated. There was prison, and there was very perspective for a future for many people with whom I spoke, and I have always tried to speak with many people in the camp.
Yeah.
And I think with what all people have gone through, and I have in a previous book, in fact my doctoral thesis, analyzed what Edward Kennedy has done, because Ted Kennedy was the chair of the Judiciary Committee in the House, in the Senate. And he, since 64 until 73, has gone every year to Vietnam and reported. And his last report said it was more than 10 million displaced persons of the war. And of course, you know the story, what has happened more. And so all that were reasons that was survival in dignity and a perspective for the future, making very difficult.
Yes.
People don't flee for spurious grounds,
Right.
because we know how many have drowned and how many have been raped and killed by pirates.
Yes.
So even though perhaps only a percentage would qualify under the classical refugee definition, but we have come a long way to recognize that if people have not a way to set up a future, and there is, in this particular case, a particular political responsibility or historical responsibility of this country, as of my country for Nazi Germany and for people and their families who have suffered or were killed.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Trả lời cái câu hỏi mà tại sao là sau cái người Cộng sản chiếm miền Nam Việt Nam, đất nước đã hòa bình rồi mà người ta lại tiếp tục ra đi, thì bà có nói là ở trong cuốn sách này bà cũng có cả cái 10 lý do, và đối với người Việt Nam chúng ta thì chắc là rất là rõ ràng. Chỉ xin tóm tắt là từ tù cải tạo, từ tình trạng kinh tế, từ bị đuổi đi vùng kinh tế mới, từ những cái chuyện mà không có tương lai để sống, thì thường dầu biết là đương đầu với những cái sự chết chóc ở biển khơi, nhưng vì không có tương lai thì mọi người đều muốn ra đi.
Yeah. So then, let's talk about the local government policy at the time. I mean, what was their attitude toward the Vietnamese boat people?
In Southeast Asia,
Yes.
the policy in Malaysia was shoot on sight
Oh, gee.
in the mid of 79 by Prime Minister Mahathir. And the policy in Singapore was also towing out and only allowing under 5 conditions that Vietnamese boat people come ashore, that there was a guarantee, not just by UN High Commissioner for Refugees, by a third country where they would be resettled within 3 months, that there shouldn't be more than 1,000 at any one time, and that countries have to really adhere to these conditions. And I know the question was, how do you manage? But we produce results. To the extent possible, where we got a guarantee right away from traditional countries like America, France, Germany. Within 3 months, if it was possible, they were resettled. So we delivered results, and the government then started to be more amenable, and we had up to 6,000 people in the camp. And sometimes they could stay longer. It is all in international refugee policy a question of trust and building partnership
Right.
to solve problems together between the state and the UN with the refugees and the local governmental and non-governmental community.
Hỏi về cái tình trạng mà người tị nạn bị đối xử như thế nào đối với lại các chính phủ ở trong cái vùng Đông Nam Á đó, thì bà cho biết ví dụ như chính phủ Malai là ra lệnh bắn thẳng, và chính phủ Singapore thì ra những điều kiện nhận, nhưng mà ra những điều kiện là ví dụ phải được bảo đảm cho đi tị nạn định cư trong 3 tháng và cái trại không quá 1.000 người. Tuy nhiên là cũng phải do thương thuyết, bởi vì cái người cứ tiếp tục đến thì làm sao cũng có đôi lúc cái trại nó đến 6.000 người. Thì cái đó cũng là những cái mà tin tưởng và cái phần mà sắp xếp, và cái đó là cái nhiệm vụ của cao ủy tị nạn, lo lắng cho những người đến đặt chân đến những đất nước đó.
Yeah, so I remember it was maybe 1979 that some of the Vietnamese refugees, especially in Southeast Asia, Malaysia and so forth, basically forced people to repatriate, to go back to Vietnam because I guess they ran out of funds to help rescue these people.
No, that we need to straighten out now.
Yes.
Because the instrument international conferences were used because none of those countries had ratified the Geneva Convention on Refugees.
I see.
So together with the the General Secretary of the United Nations and Thatcher in 1979, there was the first conference on Indo-Chinese refugees. And there was an agreement that Vietnam should at least put a stop of expelling, especially Vietnamese nationals of Chinese ethnic origin,
I see, yes.
who had been massively pushed out.
Right.
In 1989, there was a second conference on Indo-Chinese conference, and that's where we had Vietnam to come to the table and say that we have to start a status determination procedure as it is done in the Northern Hemisphere and in America, in order to establish who are the people in need of international protection for resettlement.
I see.
And that's when the states, under the sponsorship of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, representatives in the region, started this procedure, and those who proved not qualifying to refugee criteria
I see.
were screened out, and then a program for a repatriation, which from UNHCR's perspective should be voluntary, and was basically implemented with some objection. The whole program, you may conceive, is 20 years, from 1975, the
right.
fall of Saigon,
Yes.
to the closing of the actual operations in Southeast Asia in 1995.
I see.
And then America had additional legislation by which people could apply for family reunification once they had repatriated, screened out, repatriated, then they could come to America.
I see.
And of course, you have heard about the orderly departure
Yes.
program, which was set up in the first conference in 1979, where we helped people who wanted to leave and not risk the boat to get an entry visa into a resettlement country and an exit visa from Vietnam. And that was the orderly departure program, which helped about 600,000 people altogether in the 20 years.
I see. Well, that's a good number too.
Trả lời về cái câu hỏi là có những cái có nhiều trường hợp là bị đuổi trả trở về đất nước mà mình ra đi, thì bà trả lời rằng là không phải cái nước nào họ cũng công nhận cái công ước Geneva, thành ra họ không bị ràng buộc vào công ước đó, thì họ được quyền đối xử tùy ý của họ. Tuy nhiên thì như chúng ta là người Việt Nam, chúng ta đều biết là cái làn sóng tị nạn lúc đó là ra đi rất nhiều, và dường như là chính quyền Việt Nam muốn xua đuổi người gọi là của chế độ cũ hay là những người miền Nam ra đi. Cho nên là các nước cũng phải liên lạc, cũng phải thương thuyết với chính phủ Việt Nam làm sao chặn đứng bớt cái tình trạng ra đi đó. Đến năm 1989 cũng buộc chính phủ Việt Nam phải vào ngồi bàn hội nghị và bàn đến những cái chuyện làm sao giải quyết, chặn đứng và cho ra đi trong những tình trạng có trật tự, và những người nào mà không đủ tiêu chuẩn tị nạn ở các trại tị nạn thì được khuyến khích trở về, nhưng không bắt buộc, là bởi vì nguyên tắc của Liên Hợp Quốc là phải để họ tự ý.
I just had an idea. I have already sent the electronic version of the case study on the Vietnamese boat people to Van Nam,
Yes.
the executive director of
Yes.
VATV,
Yes.
where you have it all documented. And perhaps anyone who wants to look at it, I will now prepare the package as an email.
Yes.
And then anyone who would like to really look at the facts, how it evolved over
Right.
the 20 years,
Yes.
might do that, and many might find themselves, or friends and
yes.
family also.
Yeah.
So that could perhaps help also to build some history for families
Yes.
here in the Boston area or elsewhere. So we will work on that to get this little case study. It's about 100 pages with the documentary evidence from the conferences and from the statistics and the evolution. So it gives a picture so that people who have been born afterwards
Yeah.
might just understand better what their parents and grandparents have gone through.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah.
This is very important history for, you know, Vietnamese children that were
Yeah.
born here. So now I don't remember if you already said it, but so how did you convince the Singaporean government to basically help save the Vietnamese refugees? How did you do that? Was it your charm and your intellect that interested them?
You also will find the statistics,
Okay.
and I was very pleased that when I gave a book talk in Harvard, my academic advisor was there, and I made the mention that one of my classmates in 86, 87 at Harvard
Yeah.
had approached me saying, I'm from the Navy and I was one of those pushing out your Vietnamese boat people. And I said that in the book talk, and he said, well, now he's the Deputy Prime Minister, Theo Hien. And so in the end, I wrote to him shortly thereafter, and I said, now you have a chance to have Singapore in a book, because Singapore, Macau, South Korea, and Japan is always among other countries, because the numbers, the total number is about 40,000, but every person counts, right?
Oh, yes.
So I
yes.
got the Singaporeans to, he responded and put to his director of research to work with me. And we have now the full statistics on Singapore and some cases from Singapore, so that people can get a clearer idea. And it will show in this table of statistics that in the 3 years, from 78 to 81, it was about 60% of the 100% of the 40,000 who arrived only in those 3 to 4 years, when I happened to be there.
I see.
And why were we able to disembark? I mentioned already.
Yeah.
It's confidence, it's a cooperation, it's producing results.
I see.
Trả lời cái câu hỏi mà bà cho biết rằng là làm sao mà bà thuyết phục được chính phủ Singapore lúc đó có thể giúp đỡ đến cả trên 40.000 người Việt Nam tị nạn lúc đó. Trong cái thời gian đó thì bà có nhắc trở lại là lúc đó bà có quen biết và làm việc với một người, và bây giờ ông ta đã trở thành phụ tá thủ tướng của chính phủ Singapore. Thì lúc đó thì bà cũng cho biết rằng là với cái sự tin tưởng, bởi vì chính phủ đất Singapore rất hẹp, chính phủ không muốn có nhiều người ở đó mà không biết chừng nào phải ra đi, cho nên họ rất là vì cái bảo vệ đất nước của họ, cho nên họ phải có chính sách như vậy. Thì bà cũng đặt lấy những sự tin tưởng và nhờ các đất nước khác giải quyết và cam kết rằng là cái số người tị nạn đó được chấp thuận cho ra đi, không để lại làm gánh nặng của đất nước Singapore.
Yeah, I know that the case studies are already in the book, but it would be interesting if you can share maybe one or two cases of what the refugees have told you, share with you?
Well, I was thinking when you asked me, and I was thinking of Mr. Tranan Kiet, who in 80 was the camp leader, because we had a very serious self-government structure in the refugee camp.
Right.
And the refugees really did many things themselves, and also every Thursday participated the leaders in our staff meetings in that city.
Yeah.
So Tranan Kid had left with a boat, and his wife and his little daughter with another boat, and they lost track of each other.
I see.
And the Canadian immigration officer is interviewing Mr. Kiet, and Mr. Kiet shows his picture of his wife and his daughter.
Yeah.
And the Dick Martin from Canada said, "Oh, I just interviewed them yesterday in Pula Bidong."
Wow.
And well, then I have to accept you because I accepted them. And so we couldn't get them to Singapore, but we ensured that they would have the same date of departure from Kuala Lumpur and from Singapore to meet in Ottawa.
Wow.
And he then afterwards wrote that they found each other in good health, and they were reunited. There were some others, because of course you know much better, many left on different boats and then didn't have trace.
Right.
And we tried a lot ourselves, but also with the International Committee of the Red Cross, who is specialized to find people. And I must say, if there's one thing which I don't want to miss, is the joy, the happiness to reunite parents with their children.
Yes, of course.
And I could go into more cases, but this is one which just popped up in my mind.
Thank you, thank you.
Một cái chuyện coi như là một cái phần thưởng tinh thần cho bà là bà có kể đến cái trường hợp của anh, một người tị nạn ở Singapore có thể là tên là Trần Anh Kiệt. Thì anh Kiệt đó là đi xuống thuyền đi thì với vợ con, nhưng mà vợ con đi cái thuyền khác và lạc đi. Khi ông tới Singapore, ông làm việc ở trong trại và rất là một người hăng hái làm việc, và khi được lên phỏng vấn thì chính phủ Canada phỏng vấn ông ta, thì ông ta đưa cái hình ra nói là đây là cái gia đình của tôi. Thì cái người phỏng vấn ông ta đó thì nói rằng ồ, tôi mới phỏng vấn cái bà này ngày hôm qua. Rồi thế là ông đã tìm được vợ con ở cái đảo Bidong ở Malaysia. Còn trong lúc ông ở Singapore thì người ta sắp xếp cho hai gia đình đều đi, cho hai cái gọi là lúc đó tị nạn gọi là hai cái form đó được cùng đi tị nạn đến thủ đô Canada, tức là Ottawa, trong cùng một lúc và hội ngộ với nhau ở đó. Đó là cái rất là chuyện rất vui.
That makes it all the worthwhile. That makes 15 hours a day, 7 days a week work.
That's right. That's a reward for your help. So you are our big heroine, right?
No,
yes,
there are many
absolutely.
others too, but these
I'm
things
sure, but
make it really.
Yeah. So let's talk about after you left UN though. I learned that you were involved in getting a private German ship sailing to Southeast Asia, basically.
This was Kapanamur, which we just mentioned already.
Okay, so
that's already done.
Okay,
but I wanted to make sure that we also, since perhaps there are young people watching, and people say, how do you get into that, and how do I construct my life? Because these are the questions now which I get from my students since I've been teaching now, since I have retired from the UN in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
The first question I always ask, what is your dream? Where do you want to make a contribution? What is the significance of your life? And then, what are your big goals? And then, of course, people are a little bit surprised. But then, as I said, to work with refugees or in humanitarian affairs, it's not a profession. It's not a 9-to-5 profession. And that is something which we are working at in the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative with simulation exercises, where people are with boots on the ground in the rain to simulate a refugee emergency. And 50% of the students say, no, this is not for me.
Yeah.
But the other 50%, they say, this is for me. And these are the kind of people we need, and these are the kind of people we have today. They will face the challenges. I have full confidence. It's a different word. In our time covered by this book, we didn't have all the technology, the cooperation with information and technology communities to do SMS and satellite monitoring, crowdsourcing, and that's now an important role for refugee protection. So I would just say that we need to humanize politics and depoliticize humanitarian work with a warm heart, a cool head, with empathy, energy, and engagement.
Yes, I totally agree.
Trả lời cái câu hỏi là làm sao có ai tiếp nối là cái công việc của bà hay không, thì bà trả lời rằng là thường thì nếu như người nào mà nhất là giới trẻ, bà muốn nhắn nhủ với giới trẻ thì chắc là giới trẻ đã nghe lời nhắn nhủ của bà nhiều hơn là nghe cái lời dịch này. Nhưng mà tôi cũng xin tóm tắt trở lại là thường mình có yêu thích cái việc này hay không và mong muốn làm việc này hay không. Đây không phải là việc làm từ 9 giờ sáng cho tới 5 giờ chiều mà là cái việc làm toàn thời gian, nghĩa là lúc nào cái lòng của mình cũng đặt vào đó.
So I really wanted to pay tribute to the work you do with Van Nam of VATV, with all the colleagues and all the former refugees, let's put it this way, because you are people now living in conditions of liberty and peace.
Thank you. Thanks to your help
And
saving us, yes.
And the refugees of today, they hopefully will eventually also live in conditions of peace and liberty. And we just have to make sure that we keep in our minds that when we go to bed at night and have had our dinner and have our clothes on our body and can speak our mind, that there are many still in this world who are not in this situation, and that we all have to have this common goal. And later on I will refer to Immanuel Kant.
Thank you.
Đến đây thì tôi xin được nói bằng tiếng Anh với bà một đời là on behalf of the Vietnamese VATV audience, include many both people. I deeply thank you for your dedication, your service, and especially your love for all the refugees. Dr. Druke, you are ever in our heart.
Yes,
Big
indeed.
thanks.
Yeah.
You too.
Thank you.
You know
Thank
that, and I really love the Vietnamese boat people. And I mean, you know, you always leave a piece of heart with whomever you have worked, and
And I
I'm
hope
very
more.
grateful that we can have this meeting.
Yeah, and I hope there are more young Luise like you out there who's willing to help save people
They are there.
who don't have the freedom that they deserve. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
We don't have time right now, so once again, thank you so much. We're forever grateful to you. If you would like to contact us to make your comment or have any suggestion or would like to view the book, please contact VATV at vatv@vietaid.org, or you can call 617-822-3717. Thank you and have a good evening. We look forward to seeing you again next week.